Yoo-hoo, hello world. I'm back again with the second in my series about the mono stereo differences between Beatles records. I will be today mainly focusing on A Hard Day's Night and the Beatles for Sale, although I will include some EP and single B-side tracks and what have you as well. I missed a few out of the last one. I missed out Thank You Girl, for example, which is a bit of a shame, but I'll try not to miss any out of the 1964 recordings here. Now, what has actually become more apparent to me as I've been researching this series, and I've done a lot, I've done hours and hours of research on this over the last week or so, is that the differences are not so much with the mono and stereo differences, but more to do with the American and UK releases. So, for example, with the United Artists were the company that made the film A Hard Day's Night. They wanted to do a tie-in album, and they weren't really prepared to wait for stereo mixes. Plus, they didn't follow the format that we had over here. The format that we had over here was side one was selected songs from the film performed by the Beatles, and side two was just 6 other songs that were new at the time and they wanted to include on side 2 of the LP. No such luck for America, I'm afraid. America got an album called A Hard Day's Night, but the mono album contained the UK mono mixes of the film songs, or most of the film songs, not all of them, funnily enough. The stereo album contained mono mixes that had just been, they weren't even really fake stereo, because at least in fake stereo you're making some sort of attempt for the mix to be different in both speakers all the way through the song. They didn't even do that. Imagine you've got a pair of headphones on. Here's one ear, here's the other ear. A kind of example would be to have the whole mix on this side. I don't care to switch to the whole mix to this side, much for money, back to this side, money can't buy me love, and that happened all the time. Okay, I'll give you, 1 or 2 examples of that as we progress. The songs on the UK side B of Hard Day's Night ended up getting spread over a whole 4 different albums, and it's worth pointing out, and it won't be the first time or the last time that I point this out, but by the time of Revolver, when America finally stopped making their own different albums, apart from Magical Mystery Tour, which we've come to kind of accept, but when they kind of stopped buggering up their track lists, as it were, they'd released 11 Beatles albums, 12 if you count the fact that there was one called The Beatles Story, which was a lot of interviews and such like. So they had 11 albums to our 7, okay, and that shows just how much money Capitol were prepared to make from the same amount of recorded material. That sounds very unfair on the Americans. I know it does. The UK had their own ways to be greedy. I don't doubt that. I'll perhaps make a video about one of the most blatant ways that the UK were greedy, but that'll have to sort of wait for another video. And in Capitol as well, when they released the other 6 songs from the B-sides, they didn't use the proper stereo mixes either. And what actually happened was that America didn't actually get official releases of the stereo albums or the stereo songs on A Hard Day's Night until some of them appeared on an album called Rock and Roll Music in 1976. Some of them appeared on an album called Real Music in 1982. So we're looking at more than a decade later before the Americans got their stereo versions, and even then they were spread out on different albums, and they never got the UK format of A Hard Day's Night until the CDs and stuff were released much later on. So there we go. So I've got a whole great wodge of notes here. Talked about that. One thing I will say is that, because I even investigated, thinking about the US box sets. There's a CD box set that contains the US albums up to Revolver. But I think the idea about all those different mixes and stuff, that's all been corrected for this box set. So although the CDs get the track listing, they don't get the American mixes, unless if there was something radically different about a mix, I think they would put that on. So perhaps a song like Anytime at All, for instance, which in the American version had lost half of its piano, or at least had half of it drowned out in reverb, for example. So that might well be different, but by and large they're using the UK mixes on that box set of CDs. Yes, now one of the things that had really revolutionised Beatles records was the 4-track recording thing. Abbey Road got 4-track in the tail end of 1963. The first Beatles record, as I said last time, was I Want to Hold Your Hand. That was the first one that was recorded in 4-track. 4-track enabled better stereo separation, more instruments and vocals, and even things like double tracking of vocals. Now, the past 2 Beatles albums do contain double tracked vocals, particularly on With the Beatles, but once you've done a double track, that would be overdubbing. You'd be copying that down onto another tape, and building up the hiss and building up the hiss and building up the hiss. Much easier to do that on 4-track. And one thing that I wanted to try and correct in this particular video, I think I might have given the impression that EMI didn't release records in stereo until 1963, and that is not the truth. It's just that in 1963, this is coinciding, the Beatles sort of bringing out their records is coinciding with EMI thinking that they might like to release some pop records in stereo, at least pop LP records. Singles, different issue. Okay, they were always mono until the late 60s. But again, that was a marketing decision. We will market singles to teenagers who are more likely to have mono record players. It wasn't that for whatever technical reason we couldn't release singles in stereo. It's just that we just didn't. Okay, what other bits and bobs have I got here? So yeah, as I say, the mono stereo differences, there are some. Okay, particularly on a Hard Day's Night, there are quite a lot of differences between the mono and stereo mixes. But there's also an awful lot of anomalies, because let's not forget, these mono and stereo differences, even with something like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, were not done on purpose. They were anomalies themselves. Okay, so basically, if I talk about the anomalies on these records, they're just as interesting. What I will say, a big disclaimer, I've got it written in blue up here. All anomalies are verified with the stereo mixes. And I'm not just regurgitating the What Goes On anomalies list, which you can find on the internet. I put the link to it in the last video, and I might put a link into it again. I've verified them. If I can't hear it, it doesn't mean that the anomaly is not there. It just means I couldn't hear it, so I'm not going to mention it. I'm not going to tell you to listen for something if I can't hear it. But also, I can hear an awful lot more of these anomalies that have not been reported, or at least it's been a long time since that website's been updated. A long time. They don't mention anything beyond about the anthologies. As I say, they're still aiming at a mono audience, even though stereo is becoming more popular, and that's what I meant, basically, in the comments I made about stereo recording in 1963 when they were doing Please Please Me and Love Me Do. Stereo was becoming more popular. Okay, that's all I meant. And I have to say that all the UK original 1964 stereo mixes are very good. All of them. Okay. Where can I get them? Right, stereo mixes. Vinyl and cassette, even 8-track and reel-to-reel fans. So you will find the stereo mixes available from 1964, i.e. Hard Day's Night and For Sale were released in 1964, up until 1987, okay, on the old formats. Mono, 1964 up until the late 60s on vinyl. And then in 1987, up until 2009, For Sale and A Hard Day's Night, as well as Please Please Me and With the Beatles, were CD, LP and cassette in mono, based on the new George Martin digital masters from that time, the 16-bit 44 digital masters. Okay, nowadays they're available in stereo and mono, although you might have to go to box sets to get the mono ones, but the stereos, LPs and CDs of the 2009s are available separately. I'll show you what I've got here. Okay, what I've been referring to. Mainly, it has to be said, I've been referring to Apple Music on headphones, because listening to Anomalies is very, very difficult without a pair of headphones. My hi-fi is very good, but I have not got a headphone amplifier, so I can't really listen to it on there. So I use my Bowers & Wilkins wireless headphones, which are actually quite good. I'm getting to quite like them. I have done some comparisons with the LPs, and here are a few examples. So this is my stereo Hard Day's Night. This dates from about 1976, this pressing. This is my mono one. Now this is actually from 1982. They did some re-releases of the monos. They tried to make it sort of appear as if it was 1960s. So you've got this yellow Parlophone label. You haven't got the sold in the UK text along underneath the Parlophone label. And what you have got on here, you can't really see it. I'll see if I can move it a bit closer. But there you can see the word mono, which you wouldn't have on a 60s one, because, as I say, all records were mono in the 60s unless they stated that they were stereo. This one here is from the mono box set, and one thing I would like to point out is this sleeve. These are flip back sleeves. They quite often get a bit dog-eared around the edges there, but these are flip back sleeves. This is how they would have been released. The colour of this sleeve is much more in line with what it would have been in 1964. This kind of really kind of dark blue. It's, can you see it's gone a bit lighter for the 70s and 80s reissues. There was another company, not Garrod and Lofthouse, there was another company that also made sleeves, and I've forgotten what their name was. Somebody will remind me, I'm sure. But their sleeves were more this colour, okay? And you'll notice as well that these are not flip back sleeves, because from the 70s onwards they stopped making them. This again is just to make it appear to be more authentic than it actually is. And if you look at the label though, you'll find that none of the Northern Songs credits and stuff like that are there. Yeah, all songs published by Sony ATV Music Publishing Limited. Okay. Now with For Sale, one of the things that I've bemoaned a long time is that the only stereo mix I've got of, as in a physical copy of For Sale, is a very naff cassette where all the songs are in the wrong order. It's actually quite poor quality for cassette. That's all I've got, okay? Until today, well, actually until yesterday when I ordered myself a stereo. This is of the 2009 masters, okay? And although this one comes from the mono box set, it was released, I think, about 2012. Something like that, 2012, 2013, at some point like that. These are from the original master tapes. This one here is a digital master from 1987, a mono one. And again, look at the sleeves. And one thing I will show you, the 1980s mono and the 2009 stereo both have the album coming out of the side the way it would normally do. Like that. Whereas in the 60s, the original is actually much better, I think. It actually opens up and comes out there, like that. Okay. And again, I think the colours of the sleeve would be more faithful. It probably looked a little bit more like this one. As I say, this is from the mono box set, and these colours tended to be more accurate. Right, hopefully that's as clear as mud. All right, yeah, but as I say, the Anomalies I've tested from the stereo mixes over headphones. All right. Now, okay, going to A Hard Day's Night. Just one quick example here of the differences between the United Artists stereo, or excuse for stereo, okay, and the actual UK thing. There are actually 1, 2, 3, 4 mixes of this song in existence, okay. The UK mono, and then a fake stereo made from that to satisfy the United Artists, which apparently is mono but shifts towards the left for Paul's solo vocal bridge when I'm home, and towards the right for the instrumental break. Okay, that's the only time I'm ever going to mention that, you know, particular issue again. All of the songs that United Artists mixed into stereo do similar things. All right, there's a mix on the CD version of the Red album 1962 to 1966, which is slightly better. The vocal is slightly more in the center. It says here that Real Music was the first US release in stereo. It's 18 years late. In terms of Anomalies, there is a double track error. The second and third time that they sing "I Should Be Sleeping Like a Log," there's an error there. You'll hear kind of the double tracks. You know, they don't quite keep together. Okay, so you get like a log is what it almost sounds like. And in Feeling You Holding Me Tight, the last time that they sing that, it's an edit. I Should Have Known Better has some problems in the harmonica. It's the stereo edition that has the dodgy harmonica. Sounds like it's cutting up, almost like John Lennon's running out of breath while he's playing it. And they corrected it by repeating a little bit of the phrase before he stopped, as it were. So da 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 da. And they actually, in mono, they actually just snipped a little bit of the previous phrase out and edited that and made a copy of it like that. It says here that the mono fades out faster than the stereo. There was a later edit for the US version of Real Music in 1982, which has a slightly different harmonica edit. Okay, there are a couple of really bad edits in this song, regardless of what you're listening on, mono, stereo, or Fisher Price toy. Never Realised What a Kiss Could Be in verse 1. There's a huge edit in the middle of that. There are bad edits after the instrumental that sound like a record jumping. And the final note of the solo, it's kind of a bit dodgy there. And then when you get to You're Gonna Say You Love Me Too, oh, and When I Ask You to Be Mine, there's a knock there and it jumps. And people who bought their new copies, their brand new stereo copies in 1964, I'd imagine would be taking their record back and saying it jumps, and then finding that every single version of it that existed jumps. Okay, and there is also an edit during the fade out as well. Right, If I Fell. The main thing that is different about If I Fell is that there is no double tracking on the mono version in the introduction. The If I Fell in Love With You, Would You Promise to Be True bit. There's no double tracking there at all in the vocals. There is in stereo. The stereo version also has a mistake that was left in by Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney sang... The second time is talking about "Sad If I Knew Love Was in Vain." He cracks and the note doesn't last as long as it should, and it goes out of tune. It was corrected again by means of an edit, similar to how they edited the harmonica in the intro of I Should Have Known Better. Right, I'm happy just to dance with you. There's no real differences there, except that in stereo, there's a big drum in it, and it's adding an extra overdub of his drumming, and it's this tom that goes boom 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 and so on, and that is very 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 prominent in the stereo mix. You wonder why it was quite left in the center. After If Somebody Tries to Take My Place, the first time, there is a tiny snatch of speech. You can't tell what it is, but it's in stereo. You'll hear it center right. Okay, if somebody tries to take my place, then some speech. Let's pretend we just can't see his face. Someone says something. And I Love Her, the United Artists mono does not have any double track vocals on it, whereas in the UK, even the stereo and mono get double tracking. However, there are slight differences between the double tracking of the stereo and the mono. And the UK mix has lots of double tracking errors and dropouts throughout the whole song. Okay, and then there's also, it sounds like George Harrison talking towards the end of the guitar solo there. Again, listen really, really carefully in stereo and you'll hear that. Tell me why. There are no real mono and stereo differences, except that the stereo has a noise that has been edited off the others, and I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, but if we go back to the Anomalies now, here you're going to have to sort of write down these timings. Okay, at 14 seconds there is an extra who in the vocals in mono and stereo, and I've checked. It's in the center in stereo. 14 seconds. So tell me why you cried and why you lied to me, like that. It's not like Paul McCartney. It was well known for doing his who's and oh yes and things like that, but this is not one of those. This is something that definitely should not be there. It's abruptly cut out and it really should not be there. If it's something that I've said or done, there's double tracking errors there. Now, this one is one that I heard. Now, I wonder whether or not it's deliberate. It does appear to come in later, but at 1 minute 20 to 21 seconds, it sounds like someone is imitating a cymbal, i.e. someone is going like that. Now, in the middle 8, there are double tracking errors at 1:42, and then the ending is absolute chaos. Okay, this is why they actually mixed a little bit off the ending in the mono edition, because there is a very bad guitar swish right at the very end, but the whole thing just dissolves into more or less chaos at the end of that. You'll hear guitars honking and squeaking, the double tracking goes out of time, there's a massive edit towards the end of that last line. It is chaos. So that's what that noise is that they say was edited off the stereo. It was a guitar going whoosh, like that on the end of the stereo version. Can't Buy Me Love. I'm a bit confused about Can't Buy Me Love. This whole sort of thing which I got from the Usenet guide is mainly talking about drums and how the mono appears to have more drums on it than the stereo does. I just think it seems to have louder drums on it. I really do. I just think it's got louder drums on it. Obviously, then that will obscure something else. In this case, it's the guitar. One important thing is the guitar solo on this song is actually 2 guitar solos. One that George Harrison didn't like, and so he did a better one, and the other one didn't quite get erased. That's happened since on other songs. Your Blues, for example, on the White Album has got a faint bit of earlier takes on it. So, you know, it's not abnormal, and especially when you consider they recorded this at EMI Pathé Marconi, and it was essentially done in about an hour, really. They'd just done Sie liebt dich and Komm gib mir deine Hand, the 2 German songs, which I'll talk about later, by the way. But yeah, this one here, they just thought, oh, we've got an hour or so left, we'll quickly knock up a song. They knocked up Can't Buy Me Love, recorded it one way, revised it, decided that the solo could be better, got George to quickly redo his solo, and it was done and ready. The only thing it needed was a mono mix, which was done a couple of days later at Abbey Road, but yeah, it was done in an hour. So it just goes to show, when you think about this picture here for the next album, that's how knackered they were. You can understand, can't you? Anytime at All seems to have had similar issues. I'm going to put them like that, drum wise, to Can't Buy Me Love, i.e. is it more drums, is it compression that's working over time or whatever. I just think it's louder drums on Anytime at All. There is a dodgy US mono version, but I think I mentioned it a bit earlier on. Basically, the US seems to put so much reverb on their songs It says here, the US mono has the piano mixed way down compared to the others. It's not completely missing, as some say, and the single drum beat just before the chorus is either missing or way down, so we only hear what sounds like a thump on a guitar body. Now, in terms of Anomalies, one thing that is not on an Anomaly, but is not really, it's a John song, but it's not really noted anywhere that Paul is the one singing the second Anytime at All in every chorus. In the solo, the bit that goes dum 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 dum, in that bit there, the guitar and keyboard chords are different. They seem to be playing. One seems to have flubbed, and one, I think it's probably the keyboard that's probably flubbed, and they clash quite badly. At 1:32, it sounds like Paul says something in the right hand channel. And then at 1:48, there's a jolt in the cymbals, which you'll hear on the left. I'll Cry Instead. There is apparently, on the United Artists Hard Day's Night mono, there's a version there that's got a repeat of verse 1 edited in, and it's also there for the fake stereo as well. And so it's just a tiny bit longer than normal. At 38 seconds, there's an extra heavy tambourine. It was suggested on the Anomalies website listing that it was dropped. I don't know. It just sounds like somebody was just banged the tambourine a bit too loud there. At 48 seconds, there's one of these Please Please Me-esque kind of lyric clashes. One person sings, I'm going to hide myself away, and the other person says, I'm going to lock myself away. George flunks the guitar during the verse that goes, don't wanna cry when there's people there. They edit it right down. You can hear he's going all over the place. And he's faded up in the next verse when he's a little bit more confident of what he's playing, when he gets himself together again. Right, things we said today, not a lot really to say about that. There's no real differences between the mono and stereo. At 1:28 going on for 29, there is a slight anomaly where Paul says, we'll go on and on, non. We'll go on and on, like that. So basically it is an edit there. Right, when I get home, the US Capitol mix has different double tracking issues compared with the UK. The piano levels are also different. Paul has a terribly sore throat on Whoa Whoa Ah. Whoa Whoa Ah. Whoa Whoa Ah. You're just hearing. I'm not going to do it to my voice actually, because it's, you know, it'll ruin it. But yeah, he does crack and he's like ah like that. Right, you can't do that. There's no differences there. Doesn't appear to be any anomalies either. And I'll be back. The US version seems to be slower, has more reverb, and is very wobbly. Okay, but having said that, if you listen to the UK version as it fades out, it still wobbles. Okay, and it's worse on my Hard Day's Night cassette because of the more wow and flutter compared to vinyl. Right, now we're going on to the Beatles for Sale. Here we are again. No reply. I've got sort of slight differing issues here with the first anomaly. It comes immediately after the first stanza. In other words, I saw you peep through your window. Then there is a cough. Okay, there is definitely a cough there. In stereo, you can hear a cough followed by some speech. Now, whether the cough is much harder to hear in mono, so whether or not the speech is there as well, I can't really tell that, but you can definitely tell that it is cough followed by speech on the stereo version of it here. There's also, I tried to telephone, they said you were not home. In stereo, the reverb disappears, but it was fixed on the mono 1987 mix when they quite often used 80s reverby effects equipment to replace the old 60s gear that they used to use. It is not fixed on the stereo version at all. Okay, even on the latest stereo versions, you'll find that reverb disappears. It also, the reverb and the double tracking disappear at 59 seconds on the word In My Place. Right, I'm a loser. Buzzing guitar strings right throughout the whole introduction 0 seconds to 7 seconds long, 9 seconds to 11 seconds long. Not what I appear to be. There's a really odd scraping noise. It sounds like, if you imagine the beginning of Sergeant Pepper, where they're tuning up the strings and you hear some sort of bow scraping and stuff like that. It sounds like that. I.e., it sounds like a string section is about to join in, but it doesn't. It really is very weird. Babies in Black, no real differences between mono and stereo, although in stereo an edit is very, very clearly heard at 1:30. Okay, it jumps in. Okay, the mono just appears to get louder, but there is a skip going on in the drums. There's some more Please Please Me-esque vocal clashes here. One person's at 1:43, one person sings but, though, he'll, and another one sings and though she'll never come back. And at 1:51 there are some very distant harmonies. They're not there at all at any other point in the song. 1:51 seems to be a very, considering that it's only 2 minutes long, it just seems to be a very, very strange place to suddenly put this extra harmony line in that isn't even mixed in properly. It sounds like it's, you know, miles and miles away, that's just been caught in the microphone rather than, you know, actually someone sung it on purpose. Right, the song Rock and Roll Music, there's no real mono or stereo differences, but there is a piano dropout in the centre. It goes dead. It is not just the pianist not playing, the whole thing goes dead. And just follow the piano all the way through it. On headphones, it's somewhere up there, i.e. top right hand side somewhere. Okay, so if you follow the piano, and then suddenly at 1:46, the ambience, the hiss, everything will drop out, as well as the piano. It just goes completely dead. It sounds like they erased it by accident. I'll Follow the Sun. The stereo version is just a little bit more reverberant. It's just got a little bit of extra reverb on it. Mr. Moonlight. Yeah, Mr. Moonlight, the initial a cappella vocal line is really, really distorted. I'm surprised that the Anomalies list didn't mention it. It is so obviously badly distorted. It's painful almost to listen to it. At 1:36 in the organ solo, I love this cheesy organ solo. It is so camp, but yeah, it has a very dodgy organ note in the solo. And just after, there's a very faint hum at 1:38, which shows what note that they've got to sing next. Okay, because the organ's been playing, and then they obviously need to be cued in to sing the next bit, kind of thing. Then Kansas City. It just goes to show how good 4-track is, that even in one take, you have not got this melange of instruments that just sounds all sort of bunched up in one place for a song like Twist and Shouts. You know, this is a proper, you know, it's a proper recording, done properly, separated out, proper stereo. It's very, very good. We'll even forgive the slight drop in the cymbals at about 59 seconds to 1 minute in. For a few bars, it dips and then it comes back again, and that's pretty obvious, particularly if you're listening in stereo. Listen on the left, you suddenly find that the cymbals drop in volume, and then the mono has a shorter fade out. One that I forgot to do, as it were, was 8 days a week. How could you forget 8 days a week? There's no real mono and stereo differences here. It was slightly tweaked, although not as you'd notice, for the Red album when that was released on CD in 1993. If you go onto the What Goes On anomaly list, it gives you error 909, no anomalies found. There is one, and I found it. 1 minute 21 seconds, there is a slight skip in the bass track. Guess you know it's true. And then the following line sounds like it's slowing down, and then it speeds back up for the next line. They've obviously had tape speed issues on this song. Words of Love has got a 9-second longer fade out, and in stereo it's much more obvious who was in time and who was clapping correctly. Quite often they get out of sync with each other, out of time with one another. One starts clapping, one stops clapping, and so on. And you know, it's a little bit of a of a muddly bit there, but they kept it. It sounds good, and it, yeah, as I say, it sounds acceptable in mono. Possibly even because, you know, where one person stops and another person's carrying on clapping, it sounds like it's a bit more reverberant, a bit more of a, you know, a nice effects kind of thing. But actually, it's that they were out of time with one another. Now, Honey Don't is very interesting. The only anomaly is Ringo's voice cracking at 34 seconds. There is chatter during the instrumental, both instrumentals, which is much more obvious in stereo. Now, the way to go about hearing this, because it's so buried down in the mix, but once Ringo, because he does all this one-time play it for me, George, for Ringo kind of thing, he does all that, and at one point he goes, which Paul, it sounds like Paul, obviously thought that's really good, and he laughed. You know, gave a very approving chuckle straight after it. Once you've heard that, play it a few times, you know, and once you've heard that, then listen to those instrumentals, and you will hear all kinds of chatter going on. Again, it's not very clear what they're saying, but, you know, once you've heard that laugh, then you just keep listening for that voice during the instrumentals. Now, every little thing, no mono and stereo differences again. But between the first 3 seconds, there's lots of knocking, including an out-of-time clip-clop sound. It sounds like there's a count-in plus extra stuff going on. Now, I don't want to spoil the party. The stereo has a woo cry before the instrumental break, and it's not there on the mono version. And the guitar apparently is mixed louder on the stereo one. Now, what you're doing is very, very interesting. Now, these things here can definitely only be heard in the stereo version, but right at the beginning, on the right hand side, at what I'm going to call 0 seconds, you can get the tail end just as the first beat is playing on the drum. Boom, 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 boom. You can hear the reverb of the number 4 from when they were counting in 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's reverb there which is carrying on over the top of that bass drum. You can only hear it in stereo. It is only reverb. It is not the word 4, because if it was the word, as it were, it would be the number 1 that you'd be hearing, the first beat of the bar, but it's not. It's reverb from the previous counting, which would have been 4. At 6, there's a swish during the hand claps. Again, that can only be heard in stereo. At 12 seconds and 15 seconds, there's a spoken, very faint voice. Yeah. At 15, it's under look what you're doing. There's a very faint spoken voice. At 40 seconds long, there's an extra bass drum. You can hear it on the right hand side. Sounds like it's possibly edited in. At 1 minute 1 second, there's another one of these Please Please Me style vocal clashes. Please and You, followed by what's like an apology, as it were. It's basically them looking at each other. So, and then at 1:05, one person sings You, another person sings Ooh. If you compare that to the same verse a bit later, you'll get that. And there's also a guitar whip in the right hand side at the 1:05 version there. Okay, but really, it took me ages to hear that number 4. I went over and over and over it again, thought I can't hear it, I won't talk about that on the video, and then the next time I listened to it, it was like, boom, it's there. Absolutely. So persevere with that one. You will hear it eventually, but as I say, not on the mono. Okay, and listen on headphones. Right, everybody's trying to be my baby. There's absolutely nothing there to say about that one, really. Some of the singles and EP tracks, and I haven't got long to go on now. I'm aware that I've been talking for nearly an hour. But yeah, Come Get Me Deine Hand. Essentially, mono and stereo are the same mix. As I say, this Come Get Me Deine Hand and Sie liebt dich were done on the same day, just in a couple of hours. You know, those were the 2 main songs, followed by Can't Buy Me Love, which they rattled up in less than an hour. You know, and you know, even got a hit single out of it. But essentially, the mono and stereo are the same mix. There's no real differences there. And Come Get Me Deine Hand was a single with Sie liebt dich on the other side, but it was also released on an album which was like a compilation album of beat groups singing in German, these newfangled beat groups. So they got Komm gib mir deine Hand on there and She Loves You. They obviously didn't really go for Sie liebt dich on the album. Right, now with Komm gib mir deine, as it were, they used a twin track version of the backing, i.e. they took off the English vocals and the hand clapping as well, and then mixed the backing track down into 2 tracks and took that with them to overdub vocals onto. Okay, now at 3 seconds on Komm gib mir deine Hand, you will hear a very odd noise, a bit like a dog barking. Obviously wasn't a dog, but it sounded like one. You'll also be able to compare that with I Feel Fine as well. Then at 6 and 7 seconds, because this is a twin track recording, really it should be instruments on the left, vocals and hand claps on the right, which by and large it is, but for some reason there's some sort of leakage going on, and some of the instruments stray from the left to the right, especially true for the drums. You'll hear like a sort of extra, sounds like an extra drum phrase that's coming in over on the right hand side before they start singing. At 1 minute 22 seconds, there's a sizzle before Paul's harmony overdub. Paul's harmony overdub is actually very, very prominent. You get the feeling that perhaps he shouldn't have been quite as loud, but he just sings the word hand. That's where this overdub comes in, and there's a slight sizzle before it, and then at 2 minutes 3 seconds there's an edit in the hand claps. Now with Sie liebt dich, I'm afraid I'm going to have to get rather crude. The Beatles obviously found something rather funny about being smutty during the English version of She Loves You and also the German version of She Loves You. The English version, they quite often, it sounds like they're not singing She Loves You, they're actually sounding like they're singing She'd Love To, as in do something rather rude and dirty. I don't mean rude and dirty, but you know what I mean. Get it on, baby. And in the German version, they quite often found hilarity in the fact that the word dich, especially if you're saying it with like a hard German accent, dich, for instance, it sounds almost like dick, and so they obviously Sie liebt dich, they obviously found hilariously funny, and you can compare it. They do know how to pronounce it, because if you compare it to 20 seconds where they say dich, and they're just doing it because they didn't really want to do a German version anyway. The story goes, and you can read about it in Mark Lewis, and the story goes that they went and hid in their hotel room, and someone had to go from the studio in a taxi to collect them. They all turned up and everything, but the minute that George Martin walked in there and said like, "Where the hell are you boys?" They all ran and hid and whatever, and then they sort of meekly came out and went into the studio. They didn't really want to do it, so they took the piss a little bit, which is possibly why Sie liebt dich was confined to a B-side and not included on this other compilation album that Komm gib mir deine was. So I Feel Fine. This is very interesting. There are versions of I Feel Fine that start with a lot of buzzing and whispering and some speech, including John saying, apparently, I've never heard it, okay, this is one that I have not verified, but apparently John says it's not enough at the beginning of this thing before the first distorted guitar comes in, the fuzz guitar. The first time that they made use of feedback in the fuzz guitar, and so so most versions are what are known as trimmed versions. They don't have that speech and whispering on at the beginning, but the US Capitol version of the Red Album vinyl, as in the first release of it, does have that little bit of extra speech on it. Let me just have a look here. I don't want to say something wrong. No. What I will say is that the US mono, it says here, the US mono has an enormous reverb effect that may have been done by Capitol, probably was done by Capitol. The mock stereo made from it really stands out as the most distorted Beatles cut Capitol ever created. And I've put here also She's a Woman, because apparently that is bad as well. As I say, I've never heard it, but yeah. Right, so now at 5 seconds, there's a donk and a whiny noise. I will put a link here, because what goes on the website, they've actually made an out of phase recording of it. You can actually hear what's actually going on there. So I'll put a little link down the bottom so you can hear that. Lots of shuffling about in the intro. All right. At 31 seconds, there's some sort of guitar overlay. It might well be an overdub, but it sounds like for a couple of seconds that the guitar is going into sort of two-part harmony. There are 3 donk donk donks, and they're only there. There are other donk 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 sort of guitar sounds in there, but they're not overlaying. They're not sort of going into two-part harmony or anything. I think it's just that perhaps there was some sort of flub there, some sort of edit, and George Martin might have said to George Harrison, George, can you just give us those 3 notes that start that phrase again? We'll record them over the top, kind of thing. And it probably was, it made the mono stand up better, but those are 3 kind of stray guitar notes. They actually sound rather good, I think. At 48 seconds, there's another Please Please Me style lyric crash. Most of them are singing I'm so glad, but one person thinks the word is he's so glad, so you'll hear that. At 1:04, there is a thud in the centre right hand side before the instrumental, and at 2:11, this is very interesting, because this is where if there were dog noises on Come Get Me a Diner Hand, Paul is freaking out and whooping and barking and whatever. Don't ask me why. Maybe they're just having a funny moment, kind of thing. And that is on the end of the fade out. People have said it's a dog. It's not a dog. It's Paul McCartney going whoop 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 like that. However, just before that happens, you have got John sort of doing and Paul McCartney again off mic, so it's not meant to be there. He just does a quick echo, and it's really 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 low. That comes at 2 minutes 11 seconds. Then you've got the woofs. Okay, so that's I Feel Fine. Now, one of my favourite songs, I didn't realise it was one of my favourite Beatles songs until I started doing this work last week, and that is She's a Woman. It's got quite a complicated sort of interplay between the 2 guitars. Must have been quite difficult to kind of get that together, but it was difficult to record. It's got a sort of a bit of a kind of reggae kind of feel to it. Right, now some versions of this exist with a countdown, similar to I Feel Fine. This was the B-side of I Feel Fine, by the way. Also, a stereo version apparently went missing. Another one that was sent to Australia and was lost for about 20 years, and it was found just in time for the first version of Past Masters that was released in 1988. So, yeah, that's a bit of an interesting story. All right. Now, throughout this song, you'll hear the piano and shakers that are on the right-hand side. They drop out. Okay. The first time it happens, and a very obvious time that it happens, is at 46 seconds. They drop right out. Now, at 9 seconds, there is a very faint pop sound in the centre, and it's a bit like that sort of thing. And then there's a very clear edit into the vocals. Okay, at 13 seconds, it sounds like, and this also happens at 32 and 49 seconds, and this is something that I could be wrong about, okay, but I rather fancy that I can hear someone saying, and it's probably John going, wah, ooh, ah, wah, ooh, ah, as he's playing the guitar to get that rhythm going. All right, again, off mic, you won't be able to hear it very clearly, but you'll hear it in stereo on the right-hand side. At 1 minute 26 seconds, there is a stumble in the bass pattern. Now, what goes on reports that the piano forgets to change chord at a point straight after that. Okay, and there is a very detailed explanation as to what the chord should be and what they actually did. So read online for that. But I think that the problem was not actually caused by the pianist. It was a stumble in the bass at 1:26 seconds that kind of probably put off the person playing the piano, and so therefore it caused that little sort of stumble in and forgetting to change chords. At 1:48:49 seconds there is an edit during the word foolin'. So again, it sounds a bit like at the end of things we said today, whereas we'll go on and on and on. Okay, this is foolin'. 2:14 seconds. There's an upstroke guitar. This on the left. There's a guitar where it's like chuck chuck chuck. That's going all the way through this track. However, at 2:14 seconds, it goes a bit wrong. It goes just the tiniest little bit wrong, and the guitar seems to do a kind of screech, and it sounds like it's almost saying the word man. It isn't, but it does sound a bit dodgy. And at 2:53 there is another piano fluff that you can hear on the right hand side as the song is fading out. Alright, not really very much more to talk about now. Matchbox is more reverberant in stereo than it is in mono. There's slightly edited version. The stereo is actually better. Some of the lyrics were a little bit unclear on the mono version, and they've been overdubbed or edited for the stereo version. Particularly the Usenet bits chunk says here that Ringo sings the last word of "your puppy dog runs" indistinctly in mono, but that is corrected by an edit or overdub in stereo, and the guitar solo ends differently. So at least one of the two has an edit there. And again, the drum volume drops during the instrumental in Matchbox. Slow down. Again, not much to write home about. There is double tracking error. Now you've got a boyfriend down the street. It sounds like one person singing girlfriend and one person singing boyfriend. In mono, it was one line was turned down just a little bit for that, but in stereo, it just sounds like a clash again. Obviously, I've talked about one of my preferences. I didn't realise how good She's a Woman was, but I also didn't really appreciate the album For Sale. I've always rated it relatively high in my album rankings and stuff, but I prefer it, I think, to A Hard Day's Night. And the stereo mix, as I say, I've been listening to it on Apple Music for the last couple of weeks. The stereo mix is jolly good. Better, I think, than A Hard Day's Night. Certainly a lot. I say no. I think it's better than A Hard Day's Night. Put it that way, okay? I must leave you now because I have been going on and on for a long time now. I'll probably edit this down a lot, but having said that, it's a long time to talk to you. The next time I talk to you, it might well be about how English record companies have been greedy to kind of try and redress the balance between what I feel is, certainly with the Beatles catalogue, what I feel is a blatant money grabbing on behalf of United Artists and Capitol. But yeah, I need to do a video about redressing that balance. And then, the next mono stereo come Anomalies video will be about, what will it be about? Help and Rubber Soul, I think. All right, okay. See you later, folks. Ta-ra. Bye. This is, what am I doing here? I'm getting all in the muddle-duddle.